morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, and I think it's Wednesday, and we're going to start the stream today with our toast in a moment. We'll just give you a few seconds to get in here and see if you're up for a quick simultaneous sip. Got a couple of things prepared today. Going to talk a little bit about stuff going on in the news, technology items, and then dive into a little bit of the Notebook LM and the brain.com. We're going to do a live experiment with the brain.com just for fun and see if that comes out as well as I hope it will. So with that in mind, I'd like to invite you to grab your coffee mug and get ready for a potential sip just as soon as you're ready. We'll give it about 1 or 2 more minutes because I know there are folks who are still streaming and trickling in. But for those of you who are here and can make it, we'll get ready to do the simultaneous sip, and I'll bring up it's not really the simultaneous sip. In my case, it's the second sip because I like to do my own version of the Scott Adams simultaneous sip without the same exact version. So for those of you who are here and those of you who are ready, let's just start off by saying that all you need is a pen or a mouse or a tablet, a computer, a brain, and a coffee cup. Fill them with your favorite thoughts. I like positive ones. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the creative thought of the day, saucer full of secrets, and it happens now. Go. Sorry. Cheers. And yeah, sometimes you, even with the thing in front of me, it was cut off over here. So I'm looking at it going, oh, geez. So one of the things that I've been thinking about over the past few weeks is trying to figure out what kind of show I am. And it's like, do I just do a live show? Do I do video clips? So in reality, it's a live show for me. I'm more interested and I enjoy doing a live show. That way I can interact with folks that join, but also for me, it's kind of a performance scenario where when I am here, when I jump in, the topics that we talk about are going to be things that might be, just whatever's moment of the day, that kind of thing. And I'm just redoing the location of the picture since I've got the background for it today. So there are a bunch of topics that are out here worth maybe discussing, and we'll go ahead and jump in on the first one. So there's a number of items, especially as it relates to what's going on in the government from a fraud perspective. One of the things that was kind of interesting was this $259 million federal deferment to Minnesota. So, and also a moratorium on all new durable medical device enrollments. So things like prosthetics and things like that. So apparently, I don't know anything more than what's in the article here, but it appears that there was quite a bit of fraud going on related to the enrollments, and they're just trying to limit that. So that's our, kind of the first topic of the day that was brought up. And I'll jump into a variety of different items. So as we go here today, and some of the things that we'll see, there's an interesting topic around jurisdiction on AI opinions. So, and I guess the whole idea behind this is that there's, got to pull it over. It jumped out of the browser here. Let's translate this page. This is one of the most amazing things about AI, from having come from not having had it in the past, but the ability to just look at a site and say, let's take a look at this and see what it is. So, and even though it's in a different language, we can look at it in English. Obviously, this one was based in Germany, and it's a German-oriented story. And we're now looking at it in English in just a couple of clicks. So the idea here is it looks to me as though we're really focused on whatever happens in Silicon Valley, as far west as you can go, is some kind of creation of something new, right? It's the creative aspect of things, and once we create something, then the next thing to do is to regulate it. So this is the regulatory scenario. As soon as you send it to Europe, it becomes a regulation. So anything that's new, anything that's interesting, as soon as you go over to another country, they're going to say, no, wait, I can't do that. And that way they maintain control of the technology if that's what they need to do. So, and then, long term, it would be banned, right? We're going to ban this. I guess those are the three rules of market slowdown or market management: is you create something new, then you regulate it, then you ban it, right? And it doesn't seem very surprising, but I think it has a lot to do with the jurisdictions, where you're basically saying it's okay here, but not there, right? And so you have to be able to kind of funnel these things down. Regulatory requirements like that are pretty common. Seeing that kind of change and seeing what happens with things like that. Now, this one is actually good. So CISA, which is an organization in our government that is focused on not so much regulations, but standards a little bit around cybersecurity. And they're identifying that there are a lot of edge devices out there from an infrastructure perspective that are, maybe they need to be retired. They need to be gotten out of the infrastructure. And I can vouch that when you don't do this, you have problems. So one of the key things that I remember probably 10 years ago was the big Sony hack, right? There was a huge hack at Sony, in part because I guess they made a movie about Kim Jong-un or Il, I'm not sure which one, but they made this movie and it offended that person, that government leader, and that leader then had their hackers hack Sony. And what was really bizarre about it is one of the pathways in, as I understand it, came through CCTV cameras, and the CCTV camera items that, the devices that were out there on the edge, they were easily hacked. And it was in part because they left things in a default state. As soon as the hack happened and they fixed everything, none of those default configurations were there. But they all had like admin as passwords and stuff like that. So you'd log in, you'd get the IP address, hit it, it would prompt you for a login, and then you just type admin, and bingo, you're in. And once you're in on a device, then you can kind of move around within the network. And it's really very problematic because a lot of these systems, in order for them to work properly, they have administrative privileges between the different devices, simply because maybe they don't really manage access control that well. So here we are with devices that had been deployed for probably 10 years, and they were, they'd already been in, I think they were in for like 2 or 3 years. And it was 10 years ago when this was common practice, where it's not so much now, because that hack alone, it was like a $4 billion damage to the company as a result of intellectual property loss and all of the disruptive aspects of what happened to that company. So that hack made a lot of common practices come about and become part of normal cybersecurity. But now they're going one step further to say, look, there's all kinds of endpoint devices that you have out there. It could be a camera controller, it could be a light management system, could be a building management system, or any number of devices that, could just be like your TV box, right? The device in your house that you use to change the channel on your TV. all of those devices have some level of security on them. And if they're not kept up to date, patched and whatnot, and also properly configured, they're wide open. And we also saw, although I didn't grab a news article on this one, just this past week there was a big hack of the Claude agents, the not Claude, OpenClaw agents, where I guess 40,000 of them were attacked, and their credentials were somehow affected, and so those agents were suddenly under the control of somebody. Most people, once they recognized that this was a problem, there was a patch put out, or they took their device off the network so that they were no longer vulnerable. So, and that topic is, when it comes to an agent, is ultimately, in some respects, an IoT device. We've learned a lot about IoT security since things like the Sony hack back in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, 10 years ago. So we're now spinning up these agents, these AI agents. We are definitely seeing people put hardening as one of the things that you should be doing to make sure that you protect those agents. But it really does kind of, goes back a little bit to what we were talking a minute ago, where, we're looking for a jurisdictional regulatory requirements. These things become necessary in many cases, because if you don't have them, you don't have a way to manage the threat. And the real problem is that some of these devices, like I usually have something handy, but I don't today, but some kind of an IoT device, sometimes they have like a 25 megahertz processor. They're low power devices. They're intentionally low power because they're going to sit on the edge. They might be doing power over Ethernet, maybe just battery power. So the processor is actually not that powerful. And maybe they don't have that much memory, and they don't have any storage. So they can't even house a proper hardened kernel or a some kind of detection software that would make sure that you can't actually attack or hack it. So as a result, the older devices in many cases have to go because they're just so slow. And even now, the other thing that we've got these chip issues not getting, we have issues around chips not being available to the level that is needed, not enough memory, things like that, because of AI going crazy, and we need all of those chips for AI processing. All of those things are coming into focus right at the same time that these edge devices from years ago are really reaching the level of maturity, the maximum level of maturity that you would ever want to have them deployed. So knowing that that stuff's out there, and being able to solve it and make sure it's not problematic is a big deal. So we'll get off of that and go on to the next thing here. OpenAI is considering a contract with NATO, but the contract with the U.S. Department of Defense is apparently disappointing. Now, I don't know whose opinion that is, but I'm grabbing these headlines today just from Ground News, and it's just kind of interesting to see what their perspective is, because from my perspective, I think knowing that there's we had Anthropic recently get banned in some way from working with the Pentagon or for the U.S. Department of War, right? So that is because they were saying, look, you're not going to have 100% control of the AI. Now here we're talking OpenAI is ready to go out to NATO countries, but their U.S. Department of Defense version is a little bit disappointing, as they say. And I think about here we go. Let's try to see without translating. Even though we can, we'll see what we can do on a no need to translate version of this one. Oh, yeah, these are all. It looks like they're all other. They're not English. Let's see if this one is. English. No, this one's French. There we go. All right, so let's do the translation again, because why not? Get rid of the cookie notice, which God only knows we don't need another cookie notice. And there's our English language version of this. And basically, so yeah, the OpenAI has taken the place of Anthropic with the Pentagon, but it's not hiding its ambition to go out to NATO. So it's, again, going to the Sam Altman, bigger, better, more money, whatever we can do to bring money in, seems to be his primary focus in the world, which is kind of weird considering, again, it was supposed to be a not-for-profit business. But there you go. And now, of course, we all know it's being converted. OpenAI is being converted to a for-profit business. And this is just a clear statement of the fact that you can't just do a U.S. contract. You have to do a global contract. You have to go after every country in the world because they want to, dig into it. So I guess the contract was sloppy and opportunistic, according to Sam Altman. And I guess, it all comes down to the mass surveillance, which goes back to a lot of, this is definitely kind of the regulatory, but not so much regulatory as just for the United States. We've had the freedom of speech perspective, but also freedom from being hacked or freedom from being spied on by our own government. And then the minute you bring AI into it, the capabilities of AI from a security perspective, being able to dig into you, but learn about you and take, infer things about you that you didn't even know could be inferred. There are people that have apparently got a technology where you can tap into the wires outside your house. And when you put the wiretap on for the power, not network, not communications, not your phone or anything like that, just the power, they're able to actually tell how many screens you have running in your house and potentially capture exactly what's on your screen just from the signal of how the power is consumed across your power devices. Now, that's anecdotal. I don't know how true that is. Somebody that I know who was pretty high up in a cybersecurity area mentioned that, and I am listening to it. And it is true. Telemetry of what comes out of cybersecurity, or not just cybersecurity, but telemetry of devices is kind of a very strange thing. The telemetry is just the data we can collect about a device. And in a lot of cases, you're getting direct data, right? It's a network device, so you capture network traffic and the network information that is being used on it. But if you have a little bit more information, you can pull things from the power source or from, just identifying the connections between things. And that actually gives you a lot of inferred knowledge that just isn't obvious until you see how it's done. It's pretty crazy. So when I was looking at network traffic for SpaceX, when I was working at one of my previous companies, I could tell that an ISP was coming online, and it seemed to me as though there was a heavy amount of video traffic just because of a certain type of signal that I was seeing. And I didn't realize that what I thought was video traffic was really peer-to-peer communications between the satellites, because they had invented something of a new protocol for that communication. And it all came from, I was able to see it and go, oh my God, look, I can see all of this happening. And even though I couldn't tell exactly what was happening, I knew that it was pretty significant and that, we could infer a lot from the data that was there. So that's kind of the lesson. All of the data that we create and we share one way or the other, even though you might have encryption on it and it's locked down, with AI, the ability to extract data out of whatever this communication stream is, or whatever the technology stream is, energy or communications, you can infer so much. It's kind of crazy, kind of nuts. So apparently, we're going to have a bit of a standardized tariff going into play, and that's just a flat tariff across the board. Doesn't mean that countries won't have a higher or a lower tariff. I know a lot of people still kind of freak out about tariffs. They're thinking that a tariff is it's going to jack up everybody's price. But in reality, the way that everything that I've seen of late is that tariffs themselves are not a problem if you remove taxes. Because if you keep taxes with tariffs, that damages people, right? Damages the consumer. But if you actually have tariffs that are not a problem, in other words, you have tariffs that are being put together where you don't have an income tax on top of the tariff, it gives you a great deal of leverage so that the people can actually buy things with the money they save on their taxes, even though the cost of goods may be a little bit higher for imported items, but they're lower for things that are built in the same country. So for those of you who have been tuned in, sorry for my audio, just realized that it wasn't up to snuff. So I just tweaked it. So, but anyways, all of these updates that we've got some tariffs coming into play, and then also, the interest rates are likely to be continuing to come down in the near future. That's pretty good. Interest rates in other countries, however, like Brazil, are not necessarily going down at this point. It looks as though they've gone to 2.3 from 3.4. And I wonder if some of this is a result of the changes in our own GDP. Are their economy growing or slowing is maybe a result of the fact that they were growing sort of at our expense because of the difference in tariffs. They had tariffs, we didn't. And so they could grow, we couldn't. Now it's kind of at least on equal footing, if not reversed. So, that's just me speculating. I don't know. But it's good to know that, our circumstance is changing somewhat in this next year, and that high interest rates are not necessarily climbing over here. It might be, to our advantage, and see what's going on. Looks as though Elon Musk is actually going to be taking the stand related to his stock deflation. The fact that he used whatever he did to acquire Twitter, that he put pressure on Twitter to cause the stock price to drop, so that he was able to get a better deal. And apparently he took the higher deal anyways. So I don't know how effective this is going to be when I get into it. But again, it's one of those things where I think there's always going to be an Elon bad story going on, and maybe he is sometimes, maybe he's not. I don't know. I barely have an opinion on that one, because I own a lot of Tesla stock and interests in companies that are associated with them. So it would be good for me to see him come out positively. So I don't want to put too much of my perspective on it, because I'd like the guy to come out of that okay. So. I grabbed this headline today for a reason. It just struck me as odd, because when was the last time we even heard about a submarine sinking a ship? I mean, it feels like it was like World War II. Don't you think? I mean, maybe World War II or Korea or Vietnam or something like that, but I don't think I've heard about a submarine. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just don't recall. But it's been an awful long time since anybody has sunk a ship with a submarine. I think it's just kind of strange, I mean, it's surreal in a sense that something like this is even happening. So, so that's most of what I had to talk about in terms of the news. Not that I'm done by any stretch, because I've got some other topics that I want to talk about today. But the first thing is, just talking a little bit about news, tech news, what was going on. And then the second part of this was going to be a little bit of information about going back into my favorite topic, which is AI. So Notebook LM is, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's a pretty solid product, and it has some very interesting capabilities. And I'm going to be exploring that a lot more in the near future. I'm taking a course, so this is a little bit of a insight into that course. I don't want to go publishing the course's content directly, because obviously that's something that it's their proprietary content. I want to leave it alone in the sense that it's theirs. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to be sued for it if you want to go down that path. But I do want to share what I'm learning, because some of this isn't necessarily stuff that I'm learning from the course. It's stuff that I've already covered in the past when it comes to things like data cleansing. One of the first things that I've learned, and this goes back to, I'm going to say like 2005, when I first started doing things where I was using advanced search and fuzzy logic and things like that to find specific pieces of information when I wanted it or needed it. And now really what I'm seeing is that what I end up doing most often when I help customers is I end up helping them look at their old data and revitalize it in a way that allows them to use it properly with AI. And the problem comes down to, we often hear about how AI hallucinates. And it's true, but what it's doing when it's hallucinating is, in a lot of cases, we put information into our data sets without meaning to. So if I go into something I'm going to search or something I'm going to dig into, in a lot of cases, you go to ChatGPT or you go to Grok or Claude or you go over to Gemini or whatever, and you type something in, and those models look at the internet, right? So there's a wide open source that is influenced by anything that's on the internet. It's not restricted. It's just wide open. So the hallucinations often happen because you ask a question. You don't put any guardrails on the question. You don't put any context that says, hey, this is how I want the information to be presented. This is the source information I want you to give me. I want it restricted, tight, and clean. And don't use the internet. It almost never happens. We're basically using, in a lot of cases, AI as a glorified search against the internet. And when that happens, if the way you ask the question doesn't have guardrails, the brain is like, think of a stream of consciousness perspective. If you just stop right now and listen to the thoughts going on in your own head, when you're hearing somebody, you might silence a lot of that. But if you just pause the audio and then think, it takes you a few minutes to even begin to have your own original thoughts. Whatever you heard last is kind of in your head, and it kind of shapes what you're thinking about going forward. And then at some point, you can think of this as like when we dream. Your brain just kind of drifts into its own ransacking of data. And if you hear a question, but you're not provided any guardrails, or, when the guardrails might be, hey, when you were in high school, did you study geography? Did you study geometry? Things like that. And if that was the case, did you have anything that scoped your question down to a specific class that you took, a teacher that you worked with, whatever subject that you learned? And without that kind of narrowing, you end up where you get, your thoughts are very random. And in some cases, if you don't have a solid memory of it, but somebody suggests enough in the question, your brain will actually make up memories, totally make them up. And it's the same thing that happens here when it comes to search and things like that. So when you're trying to use something like Notebook LM, the idea is that you put things into it and restrict access. You say, I don't want anything outside of this. Don't go to the internet. Don't go anywhere outside of the scope of what it is that I'm doing. And that gives you this element of what you would call cognitive quarantine. If you use cognitive quarantine, that means you're saying, don't go to the internet. Don't think outside the box. Think inside of what I'm asking you to look at. And you basically create what's called an isolated clean room. And the grounding principle is the idea that you say, stay within the the fine confines of this clean room so that you don't hallucinate. And when you do something like that, you end up with content that can be citation oriented. So it's like, where did you get this? Well, I got it on page 4 of XYZ document that you uploaded into this library. And that's very clean and very useful when you're trying to get something specific out of a knowledge base. But if you're not, if you don't do that, what ends up happening is you have this wide open space, and if you don't put the guardrails on really tightly with the way that you do your prompt, you're going to get hallucinations or wild, wild west kind of search results that came out of everything that it was able to find or come up with, make up, because it doesn't have any kind of guardrails. Now, like I was saying, the thing that I do most often is I go into somebody's content and say, let me bring this back to the root and see what you have in that library, and let's narrow it and narrow it and narrow it and make sure that everything is formatted in a way that you can actually read. So that's creating what's called single source discipline. The hard part about doing that for an existing database or an existing data set is that there's no authority in many cases. You go back, you look at the content, and maybe something was written last year and it was valid last year, but there have been 5 versions of something newer since then. News could be coming out that tells you, hey, that's old school. That study is from forever ago. It's no longer valid. And if that's the case, how do you find an authoritative source to make sure that you're not really putting in stuff that's just out of date? You want to archive the stuff that's out of date and bring in the most recent. And that's always a lot of hard work, because you have to go find the stuff in the new context. Maybe it's easy if you have up-to-date news that you could just pull in today. Like all the news that I went over at the beginning here, that news was today's news. Yesterday's news, I wouldn't want to go over it again. And if I told you a headline from 20 years ago and it didn't have any relevance to today, you'd be saying that's a useless piece of information. I don't need it. I don't want it. And the same thing goes for AI. You want to be able to, one of the biggest handicaps, in my opinion, that was self-imposed by ChatGPT was the fact that you couldn't search anything newer than 2 years old. Do you remember that when ChatGPT first came out? You couldn't look at anything newer than 2 years old, because they wanted to make sure that they weren't going out to the internet. They weren't getting contamination. They had a curated library. And I can't remember, but it feels to me like we still had hallucinations then, but the constraint was that you had that older content. And new content with limited controls is going to hallucinate, but older content that you put controls on, like you don't let anything newer come in. How useful was that? I mean, I almost think that I know I didn't use ChatGPT for quite a while, only because I was thinking, every time I did a search for something, it said, yeah, that's too new. I can't give you any information on that. So when Grok came out, I was like, hey, this is great. It's up to date. It's got real-time information. I can get latest news on things. And that was good. Now, I still had the issue, and there are still lots of issues with hallucinations if you don't put those constraints on your prompts. But, you at least have up-to-date content, which is really important these days. So source engineering, to me, if you can do it at the beginning, wonderful. That means drag and drop the files, only the files you want to work on, into a thing, and don't allow it to go outside of that. So that's kind of the explanation of the idea of having an isolated data source for your AI. And then the source engineering is trying to make sure that you refine it and keep it to the latest, and make sure that you don't have anything that causes a negative impact. And now I'm going to do kind of a demonstration of a real-time situation in what exactly the context of what I was just talking about. So Notebook LM is one of the things that I use. It's one of my tools for research and digging. But another tool that I use, it's really more for linking and finding connections between things, is this product called the Brain. Now, the Brain, the way that I use the Brain is I'll put these, what they call thoughts, in here. Now, a thought, typically what I'm putting in are, I put the thumbnail from all of the videos that I've done, the title, and then the body content for each one of these is actually the timestamps of the video that I create, so that you can identify where within this video you would want to go to learn something or understand something. Now, that's all good, but what I'm trying to get out of this is, because I have those timestamps, I want to find where, if there are places where I talk about something like mind mapping or timelines or whatever, I want to find all of the other connections where I talked about it in previous episodes. And that's because in a not too distant future, I'm going to try and start creating some additional content, and I'll go to those timestamps and say, what videos did I talk about this, and see if I brought up one tiny little point that was useful across those videos. And that's what we're gonna do here. Is I've got this prompt that I created over here that says, using the descriptions in each one of these thoughts, I want you to identify common tags and normalize the tags. And just so you are aware, there's a tag library here that's been created as I went through some of these, creating some of these thoughts. Each one of these thoughts, I'm taking the actual tags that I use in a YouTube video when I create a YouTube video. So here's the dashboard of a YouTube video that I might have. I'll grab one of these, and let's say I go to episode 28. I've got my timestamps and I've got my descriptions, but down here towards the bottom is I have this tag list, and YouTube kind of likes the tag list because it shows who might be interested in this based on the tags. So, from the algorithm being able to say, who should I present this to? And that's what I'm going after here, is linking these tags to the thoughts so that I can go find the connections between these videos. So now I'm going to go ahead and give the embedded AI Cerebro, which I don't know how visible that is, and I can't really zoom in the UI itself, so I'm just going to leave it up here in the top right. But it says Cerebro. This is the AI that's embedded within this product, the Brain, and it's asking me permission to look into each one of these thoughts in order to read the tags, tag list, and identify things. So I'm giving it permission to go ahead and look at all of those different episodes and find the tagging, find the topics that can become a tag, and then it's going to go back and get the tags that are already out there assigned to certain thoughts, and then it's going to compare what's in the individual item and normalize between the two, so that for the episodes that I never tagged, it will actually create a tag library. Now, this is a discrete library, very specific to only what I put in here. So I've been curating this content for the past 2 months so that I have very specific data that the AI can work against and see what what kind of connections I can make between these episodes. So now that it's done that, you probably didn't see much going on in the background there, but I'm going to change the view. First, I'll close the AI, and I'm going to bring this Plex view up. And you can see that the connections between the different thoughts are these additional lines. So there's a lot of lines that are already here. What we're going to try and do, and let me just see if I want to go back and see if there are any. So it did some normalization of the library. So it normalized some of these tags. And what I'm going to say is now apply. Now apply tags to any untagged thoughts and use them to connect the thoughts with links. There we go. So let's see how that goes. And if all goes well, what we'll see is it's got the tags already, because we saw that up above. And we're going to see about whether or not the tagging goes into effect. What I'm looking for is an expansion of these links. It's probably, yep, it looks like it's adding tags. You can see the little tag icons being added to individual thoughts that weren't there before. And the one thing that's going to be curious is over here in the thoughts that don't have an episode, that it's applying tags to those. So we'll see. It could just be because of the title, The Second Sip, and episode numbers. But now that that's done, let's go take a different view, and we're going to look at the mind map view. There we go. So we've got a few. It didn't tag as many as I expected or had thought that it would, but we'll see if maybe the instructions are telling me I need to do the next step. If you'd like to be more granular tagging and linking, I can. So yes. Continue with the tagging and linking at a granular level. And let's see what happens now. So this is, it always asks for permission, which I really like in the embedded AI, because if it didn't, it could get really ugly. So what I'm expecting to see is these tags kind of expanding or growing here. And now we've got to give it permission to modify. There we go. And it looks like it just created a link right there. It may or may not ask permission to do individual links, but we'll see. Looks like it's kind of digging in. So this is the kind of thing where you can get some value out of AI from a knowledge base that isn't obvious and this is nothing like going out and just searching for an answer using AI. We're actually doing something that gives me a little more insight to the content that we have here in a way that's useful, not just find me an answer. So let me see here. If you want the next step to be use notes and keywords to refine these tags, what I would like to see is an expanded set of links between different episodes that are individual thoughts are saved in the individual thoughts to find connections between topics. An example, giving it constraints here, are links similar to the one between, the second sip for, and the second sip uh, 32. So the idea is I'm trying to give it an example based on something that's already there so that it knows I'm looking for more of that. There, let's just see how that does. So this is it's typical to do some kind of an iterative process when it comes to using AI. I don't often see enough examples of real use cases where you're trying to find these types of connections. In this case, just getting the links built in a way that's useful. I don't see that kind of, it's like, okay, create a table for me, gather information for me, scrape a website, but being able to actively go create links that don't exist today and build on it. Let's see if we can do that. Proceed. So I'm just trying to get it. I'm seeing like a couple of more links starting to show up, and I'm hoping that it will. The last time I did this, I noticed that I had to tell it proceed, 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 or continue, yes, 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 about 5 or 10 times before it did everything, because it's very careful not to overdo something in case what it is doing is incorrect or is outside the scope of what I would really want. So it looks to me as though I'm starting to see an occasional link here and there pop in that wasn't there before. And that's, I can't say that it's going to do, yes, proceed. As I said, it'll continue one question at a time, even though it's a little bit slow, but it's not that bad to be able to just say, yep, keep going, keep going, keep going. This is what I want. And then it'll take action and do the things that I'm asking it to do one step at a time. And that is, like I said, that's a good thing because you don't want it to go too crazy. Yeah, it looks like it really is doubling down on a couple of these links because it's, probably a couple of redundant links that are occurring because of multiple tags on one topic. So do a quick pass only for the remaining lonely episodes and add at least one conceptual tag. So every episode has multiple graph-based entry points. Yeah, I think proceed one more time. And that, some of this, I don't always talk about the same topic. So it's not surprising that there aren't dozens of these. I was thinking we would probably get a couple of links here and there just as a result of doing the second sip periodically. So, but we'll see. It does look like it did a fair amount of tagging and it did a fair amount of linking. And that, it's a win. I expected more, but that's also not surprising because sometimes you think you talk about the same thing over and over again, but perhaps I didn't. And that's totally cool. There we go. New tags were created. And it looks... it's definitely curious. And I know that a lot of the tags that are going to show up down here, which are... I created these thoughts just in preparation for future episodes, but they're not all... they're not all identified here. So, draw links between thoughts with common tags. I'm just trying to make it absolutely clear that I want to see more connections when there's tags that are related. I don't know if it's going to, I'm not really 100% sure. Yes. The last thing, and then I'm going to stop. But this idea is that by having all of these connections, I should be able to, I'm hoping I'll be able to find these common threads between different topics. And even though I'm pushing because I'm really just trying to see more of these floating thought connections, I don't know that it's going to do any more because I've already beat it up quite a bit. And I know I do talk about different topics every day. So it should be pretty logical that I'm not going to get a crazy amount of visual connections between these thoughts. There we go. So some of the cross-linking I may not be able to see here because of the way that I'm looking at it, but I'm going to wait until it's done. And it also may just be that I need to go back and forth between the different views before it refreshes and shows me what I'm looking for here. So let's try normal mode, and then I'll go back to the layout that is outline. There we go. You can see a lot more interlinking between thoughts there. And then if I go finally back to mind map, there. Yeah, I think that there's probably connections that I'm just not able to visualize here because of the way that the Plex is laid out. But if I go for thoughts, I can clearly now see that these 6 thoughts have critical thinking as one of the tags. So for every single topic that I want to talk about, when I want to dig in and find something a little bit interesting, if I want to, how many times did I talk about Grok? How many times did I talk about, let's say, Coffee with Scott Adams? That deeply. It's interesting that I'm not seeing. I was expecting more, so maybe I just have to figure out what's wrong with my method and go back and figure that out. And that's the experimentation. That's the practical application where you discover what is the way that is going to get you the results you're looking for. And in the long term, the results I'm looking for, hey, I want to do a video about AGI. Where did I talk about it? These are the 4 episodes I used. Now I can go in and pull those. But I really want to find out as much as possible whenever these keywords or tags come up that, I would think that there are more than one. And maybe what I need to do is probably modify the time signature, ask it to look at the time signatures in each one of the thoughts. Because if I go like into this one here and I look at the content directly, let me just, there. So if I'm looking at episode 29, it doesn't look like I have a topic on that one. Let's go back to this one here. There we go. So if I look at the time signatures instead of tags and say when keywords come up between the time signatures, I might get better results. So it's an experiment, and I'm going to see how it goes. I'm going to continue working on this. Hopefully, this will lead to something, very interesting, rather than just having to go search manually through all of this stuff. So let's go back to my original view. We're going to do the normal view, and I'm going to, I have to figure out if I need to deselect. I don't want to delete the thought, but I want to deselect the thought. And it looks like I've kind of landed on it. So we'll just go back home. There we go. Anyways, I hope this was interesting for you. It kind of that discover what kind of, when you use AI, what are the different kind of use cases? The general use case for the most part, in many cases, I think has to do with search. Like I said, for us traditionally, most people, it's just a powerful search, a really impressive search. And it doesn't become a tool that you can use to do other things with. But when you do decide you want to start using it as a tool for other tasks, then use cases like this one might become more relevant. And also knowing that the only way you're going to get the kind of content that you want is to have isolated sources so that it's not hallucinating. You can see here that the linking that I'm trying to do, it doesn't really leave much room for hallucination, because I'm saying only in these items find the connections. And so that's the kind of, in a perfect world, that's a use case that stays very tight and restricted, and you don't go out into these giant big searches and it hallucinates because it can't find the content, or because if it does find the content, it's not enough of an answer and it embellishes in order to do what it thinks you want, which is to just find an answer. So we'll come back to this at some point. It's kind of a demonstration of using this source engineering and single source discipline to stay within the bounds of what I'm doing, and then have a real world application for how to work on that information in a way that makes it more useful than it is today. So that's pretty much what I had to talk about today. I hope that was something that you enjoyed or found useful, and maybe you'll be able to use it in your own AI future use cases. With that, I will wrap it up. One more quick little sip for you. I hope you have a great day, and that you can be as useful as AI wants to try to be in your own life, and find some value in what you're doing with your day-to-day activities, like I'm trying to do. Anyways, cheers. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. And of course, moving the mouse.